Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I've always told how to voice radio. So today, I'm going to be showing you another winning deck list. This is a deck that got second place at the Italian National Championships this past weekend in Milan. Now, the first thing to mention, of course, this is not my list. This is a list of Simone Zucchelli. I'm sorry for the pronunciation there. The lovely chap. I was lucky enough to commentate his top 8 game this past weekend and interview him after the fact, or was it? It might have been one of round 7. Either way, I think it was round 7 on day 1 I actually did. Regardless, I managed to commentate one of his games. I met him and interviewed him afterwards. He was a lovely, lovely chap. This is his list, not mine, but he's posted it in the public domain. So as far as I'm concerned, I can have a comment on it. So let's start off with the Pokemon. They are probably the most important thing. And let's start off with the main attacker of this deck. It is Genesect. Now, Genesect has got his ability Drive Change, which is fine. It's quite useful. It allows you to basically take a tool from Genesect and put it in your hand. And of course, then it means that you could, attach a different tool in its stead. It's fine. It's not really a key component of the deck. And I know that might sound silly given that it's quite a good ability, but as we'll see, this deck plays tools, but it's not reliant on tools. It doesn't win through tools, but it's still a really nice thing to do. Oh no, I've got something stuck in the active. Well, let's take the Floatstone off the Genesect, put it on the thing that's in the active, and now we can retreat them. Very nice indeed, quite frankly. But really, we're here for Rapid Blaster. This is the main attack we are going to be using in the deck. 100 damage for free metal, but you discard as many metal as you like attached to the Pokemon, and it does 20 more for each energy you discard. You put free energy on there, you discard them all, you do 160 damage. Pretty gosh darned nice. Now, there's only really one other attacker in this deck, and when I say one, I really do mean one. It is an Aegislash level X, and I know that pronunciation sounds weird, but it is the official pronunciation. I have checked. And he's got the ability Mighty Shield. Long story short, he cannot take damage from any Pokemon that have special energy attached to them. So against a deck like Night March, for instance, you would be able to just, because they're so reliant on their double colorless energy, you can use something like an Aegislash. Yes, your opponent can use Hex Maniac to turn off the ability and KO it, but it's a nice Pokemon. It gives you a little bit of defense, and it's pretty good. Now, there is one other attacker. It's a very, very niche attacker. It's Bronzong Break. And Bronzong Break's got a very almost confusing attack, so to speak. Now, what it is, it's Metal Rain, and it's for a metal and a colorless, and you can discard as many metal energy attached to this Pokemon as you like. And if you're thinking this is starting to sound a little bit like Genesect DX, you're right. And for every metal energy you discard, you can do 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So if you discard 2 energy, you can do 30 to each of 2 Pokemon. Or you can do 60 damage to 1 Pokemon. So against something like Night March, for instance, you could discard free energy and actually do 30 to a Joltik and 60 to a Pumpkaboo, getting 2 prizes. It's pretty gosh darn useful. And they're your attackers. This is a very straightforward list. I did a video about Genesect as a deck. I encourage you all to check it out. I shall put a link in the description. That was my video explaining how the deck works and the options. This is my video showing you a successful list. So just to be clear, this video is not supposed to discuss other attackers. If you want that, I've made a video. This list is very straightforward. It is my favorite Genesect list I've seen so far. It's the main reason I've chosen to profile it. So let's have a quick look at the other Pokemon. Free Shaymin EX because setup. Draw until you've got 6 cards in your hand. You need to get going. There is always an argument for playing a 4th Shaymin to get a bit of consistency, especially when N is in the format and can force you to shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 1 or 2 cards as you're about to win the game. More on N in a moment. But honestly, free in a deck like this, if you play carefully, will be enough. for Bronzor because we play Bronzong. 3 of the Bronzong from Phantom Forces with the Metal Links ability. Quite simply, this is the lifeblood of the deck. We have seen that Genesect needs free energy to attack, and even when you've got free energy on the Genesect, you really want to be discarding those energy and replenishing them with more energy. That's where Bronzong's Metal Links comes in. It allows you to grab metal energy from your discard and attach to one of your benched Pokemon. Pretty gosh darn nice if I do say so. We also play one of the Fates Collide Bronzongs. And the reason we play this is because it wins matchups. Now, it's got the ability Metal Fortress, prevent all effects of your opponent's attacks, including damage, done to your benched Pokemon. Now, this is good in a couple of matchups. Definitely Trevenant, whose Silent Fear attack puts 30 on all of your bench Pokemon, but it places damage counters. That's an effect of an attack. So that means that Trevenant is going to be doing a whopping 30 damage to the active. Now, of course, there is always a problem in terms of what if your opponent starts using Silent Fear, and what if your opponent gets Trainer Lock rolling before you get Bronzong out. It doesn't auto-win the Trev matchup, but if you can get it out against Trevenant, it's super useful. Now, the rolling is up in the air, but by analogy with an old Suicune card, we believe that Metal Fortress does protect your benched Pokemon that are out when your opponent's Greninja uses its Shadow Stitching attack. Doesn't protect the active, doesn't protect Pokemon that come in play afterwards. But Pokemon that are on the bench when Shadow Stitching is used, we think, due to the old Suicune card, get protected. We have not had that confirmed, but that is the current ruling I have heard. And that's the Pokemon. Simple as that. We've got Genesect as your main attacker, Edgeslash and Bronzong Break as backups. And then we've got Shaman to set up and the Bronzongs to help you actually keep going and win the game. Now, in terms of energy, we have got 11 basic metal. The reason we play basic metal is twofold. Well, threefold, I suppose. Number one, we're not playing extra attackers like Heatran or Zoroark here, so we don't need double colorless energy. Secondly, we are using Bronzong, and he only accelerates basic metal from the discard. Even something like a shield energy wouldn't count because it's only metal when it's attached. And thirdly, let's have a look at the first trainer card, Max Elixir. This is the reason, another reason you're playing all basic metal energy. Because Max Elixir, you look at the top 6 cards of your deck, find a basic energy and attach it to one of your benched basic Pokemon. Now, this does two things. Firstly, it adds speed to the Genesect deck. It gets Genesect out much, much more quickly. Secondly, this deck is vulnerable to ability lock, things like Hex Maniac, for instance, that turn off your Bronzong's abilities. So, with that in mind, it's incredibly useful to be able to have some extra attachments with Max Elixir. Now, my friend David Hockman's done the maths, and if you've got 12 basic energy, you should hit 3 out of 4 Max Elixir. Playing 11, you should hit, at least 2, but often you'll hit 3 in the games that you play with this. Why not a 4th Max Elixir? I can only assume it's due to space. Max Elixir is a brilliant card here, but you've only got 60 cards to play with. So in terms of supporters, we play 4 Professor Sycamore. It discards your hand, draw 7 new cards. The most aggressive supporter in the format that allows you to draw the most cards, so we play a full complement of 4. We play 2 copies of N, shuffle your hand into your deck, both players, and draw a number of cards equal to the number of prize cards you've got remaining. In the early game, this is really good because it just refreshes your hand. But the thing about this deck is that once you're up and rolling, you don't really need many cards. You can replenish your energy using Bronzong. You can reuse your tools using Genesect. So if your end's down to 1 or 2 cards, it affects you far less than it might affect your opponent, because the deck kind of runs itself when you're rolling. So playing this end card can be really good. We play 2 Lysander because, well, it's Lysander. It's one of the best cards in the format. You can pull a Pokemon off your opponent's bench and KO it. 2 is what people play unless they're really, really short of room. Given that a Genesect can get a KO on a Shaman, either with a Fighting Fury Belt attached, or with just 1 discarded energy if he doesn't, it's just good. 1 Hex Maniac because, again, this is a one in most decks. You can turn off abilities. You can turn off your opponent's Shaman in the early game, or you can turn off abilities of decks that really rely on abilities. Against something like a Trevenant, you can play your Hex Maniac so that you get access to trainers for a turn, so that you can go ahead and, maybe try and search out that Bronzong you need to win the game. 2 copies of AZ. Why 2 copies of AZ? Purely because you are more vulnerable to Lysander stalling when you have your bench Pokemon Lysandered than most decks are. You're playing those Bronzongs, you're going to leave them on the bench, they have a high retreat cost. You really need to be able to get Bronzong out the active if they're stranded. So most decks play 1 copy of AZ, this deck plays 2. 4 copies of VS Seeker because it's VS Seeker. Unless you are trainer locking yourself, i.e. in a Vileplume deck, you play 4 copies of VS Seeker. It's that simple. 4 Ultra Ball because you need to search out your Pokemon. Ultra Ball gets you everything. Nice and simple. 2 copies of Skyfield. This is an interesting inclusion. This is something which I had considered in the deck, but maybe not all that seriously. It allows you to have up to 8 benched Pokemon, and this is good for a couple of reasons. Number 1, in the early game, you want to get your Genesect down to attack, and you want to get your Bronzongs down in order to keep the deck rolling, and you want to play your Shaman in order to draw more cards. You will often in the early game need more than 5 bench spaces. That's where Skyfield comes in. In the late game, you often won't need more than 5 bench spaces. So your opponent replaces Skyfield with another supporter. You are then only allowed 5 bench Pokemon, at which point you just discard the Shaman and they are no longer easy prizes on your bench. Very nice. A single copy of Super Rod to recover, generally to recover your Genesects or your Bronzongs, maybe your Shaman in the late game. You can use this to recover energy, but most of the time you want the energy in the discard pile to get it with Bronzong. 1 copy of Battle Compressor, because then you can, when you draw into it, you can discard, you can either thin your deck just to get rid of useless cards, or you can put energy in the discard for Bronzong, or you can put supporters in the discard to reuse with VS Seeker versus Seeker. Not perfect, it's only a one-off, it's not key to the deck, but it will often be very, very good for you. And we finish off having a look at the tools. First of all, there's a single copy of Assault Vest. Now remember here that single copies are more useful. You put it on a Genesect. That Genesect then gets half KO'd. You can then take it off using Drive Change and put it on a new Genesect. That's pretty gosh darn useful. This is really good against a deck like Night March, for instance, who have to use double colourless energy. But also, we saw in a game at the Italian National Championships, a Trevenant with Mystery Energy tried using Tree Slam against a Genesect. Well, Genesect already has Psychic Resistance that does 20 less damage. Then we bring in the Assault Vest, which makes you take 40 less damage from Pokemon with a special energy attached. And Tree Slam actually did 0 to the active. Although at the time it was quite funny because he also had a Metal Fortress Genesect in play, so he couldn't do any bench damage either. So he literally used Tree Slam for 0. The other 2 tools are far more common. We've got 2 Fighting Fury Belts, 10 more damage, 40 more HP. Now we're rolling. Genesect goes up to 220 HP, and an awful lot of EX Pokemon, think Evil Tally X, for instance, have 170 HP. So what you can do here is discard all free energy you've put on Genesect. 160 plus the Fighting Fury Bout goes up to 170. And then we've got 3 copies of Floatstone. Why so high? It just gives your Pokemon free retreat. Why do we have 3 copies of Floatstone? I did ask Simone about this when I interviewed him after his game, and he said, like I said earlier in the game, he said, you are a Lysander target. You got all your Bronzongs. You need all of those Floatstones. Were he playing something like Zoroark, maybe he can play fewer Floatstones, but he's not, so 3 is a good number here. Now, I like Simone's list, just so we're clear. I think it's a really good streamlined list. I love that he's not messing around with other attackers. He's keeping it real. That sounded a little bit weird, but I'm rolling with it. I love that he's playing Max Elixir. Now, when I start testing out this deck, and oh my goodness, it's on my list, I am going to try and find a 4th copy of Max Elixir. Not entirely sure what I'm going to cut, but I've got a little bit of time to figure it out. I just love Max Elixir as a card, and especially in a deck like this. Now, thank you very much to Simone for publishing his list. If you're watching this, Simone, and you're upset with me, I apologise. You did publish the list. This is merely a commentary on what I consider to be an excellent list. As I've said before, not my list, but I'm not just reusing somebody else's work. I am commenting on a picture which has been put into the public domain. Now, I'm not going to go and make this deck on PTCG. Well, I am, but I'm not going to put a game of me playing it against some random Pidgeotto deck online. I'm going to pop in the comments a link to one of Simone's games, hopefully the round 7-1 that I commented from this weekend's Italian National Championships. That way you still get to see a game with this list, and you still get to hear me commentate the game, except you get a really good player who made the list playing it at a much higher level than I probably would be able to with the amount of practice I've had. That, ladies and gentlemen, sounds a little bit better than just a rubbishy PTCGO game with me. Check out the link in the description for my Genesect video where I go into more options for the deck. This was a deck list video. That's my explanation. And that way, ladies and gentlemen, we should be all fully informed on this Genesect deck. Now, you know the deal. There is a comment section. If you want to talk about this Genesect deck, give your opinion. Maybe give an alternate list. Whatever you want, the comment section is there to help you out. Click that like button. It will make me very happy indeed. And click subscribe if you haven't, and get a friend to subscribe on your behalf if you have. As always, the most important thing, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.